After defeat became an unavoidable reality, Hitler decided to end his life himself in an underground bunker on April 30th, 1945. His death led to a series of consequences that plunged Germany into a wave of chaos, with attempts by his supporters to escape justice. Today, we will go back in time to take a look at the events following Hitler's death. Before he and his lover, Eva Braun, took their lives that evening, Hitler instructed his private secretary, Martin Bormann, to burn their bodies immediately to prevent the victorious Allies from finding their remains. The group of officers tasked with burning the body faced a real logistical dilemma: the lack of gasoline for ignition. The situation was further complicated by the proximity of the Russians to the bunker, making it impossible to search for gasoline elsewhere in Berlin. The only available method was to siphon gasoline from destroyed vehicles in the garage beneath the bunker, which were covered with concrete and construction materials. About 200 liters were quickly drawn and placed near the entrance of the bunker. While this may seem like a large quantity, it was actually insufficient. Then, Hitler's chauffeur, Erich Kempka, along with Officer Otto Gunsche and Hitler's servant Heinz Linge, placed Hitler's and Eva's bodies in the courtyard and poured gasoline on them as Russian shells rained down, sending clouds of dust and dirt into the air. They lit a pile of firewood, using a cloth soaked in gasoline under the gaze of Bormann and Minister of Propaganda Joseph Goebbels. However, the bodies did not fully incinerate even after the gasoline was consumed, forcing the group to repeat the process throughout the evening, continually siphoning and pouring large amounts of gasoline on the bodies. The remains were buried along with Hitler's dogs in a shallow trench next to the bunker, as Hitler could not bear the thought of the Allies adopting his dogs. After concealing Hitler's traces, Goebbels and his wife Magda decided to follow their leader's example and end their lives along with their 6 children. Magda was determined that none of her children should survive to spare them a life filled with shame and humiliation. She forced a dentist named Helmut Kuntz to assist her in executing her plan, although he initially refused and wanted to leave the bunker to avoid such a gruesome task. However, she threatened to tell her husband about his attempt to flee, and he had no choice but to return. On the night of May 1st, 1945, while the children were preparing for bed, Magda ordered Dr. Kuntz to inject the children with morphine to put them to sleep, and then made each child swallow capsules of the poisonous cyanide. After that, Magda and her husband went to the Chancellery Garden with aide Gunther Schwagermann, where they ended their lives with his assistance. Many who followed Hitler in life followed him in death. The mayor of Leipzig and many other city officials held a party that ended with them drinking poison, resulting in the deaths of thousands of civilians in less than 72 hours before the Russian invaders seized the city, in an attempt to avoid falling captive to the Soviet Union. Dr. Ernst Robert Gravitz, involved in horrific crimes and experiments on prisoners in concentration camps, sat with his family that night for dinner and detonated 2 grenades, ending his life and theirs. Thousands of Germans who were ardently pro-Nazi, some of whom were perpetrators of horrific crimes, preferred to leave this life and become forgotten, rather than be captured or forced to flee as humiliated vanquished, as the idea of losing the war was beyond their capacity to bear. As defeat loomed, several German officials spent their final days trying to improve their political standing and making desperate efforts to escape punishment. Hitler, of course, was not pleased with the situation. When he discovered the betrayal of followers like Hermann Göring and Heinrich Himmler, who fled Berlin after Hitler's birthday party, he wrote his final political will to express his anger at how things had turned out. After Hitler's death, Admiral Karl Dönitz was briefly appointed as Germany's new leader. When Stalin learned of Hitler's death, a man known for his brutality and excessive frankness, he allegedly called Hitler a fool and expressed his frustration at losing the chance to capture him alive. Of course, Stalin wanted irrefutable evidence of his enemy Hitler's death, so he ordered a select group from a Soviet investigative unit known as SMERSH to find undeniable proof. Smersh agents cordoned off the Chancellery Garden and the bunker area on May 2nd and began a systematic search of the area. After 3 continuous days of searching, the Russians discovered Hitler's and Eva's remains, which were unrecognizable until they were transported to a secret location and identified through Hitler's dental records. The question remains, how were those records found? The investigative unit's agents located the clinic of Hitler's dentist, who had fled to the west, and arrested his assistant, Kade Hausermann, who described Hitler's dental condition as very poor due to his love of sweets and provided them with X-ray images of his teeth. Stalin decided to show his gratitude to Kate by sentencing her to 10 years in a Soviet labor camp. A day after Hitler's death, the remaining members of the German government announced the news of his death via the Reichssender Hamburg station, the last German radio station on shortwave in the German-occupied territories in Hamburg, preceded by sad music from Wagner and Bruckner. The report regarding Hitler's death was somewhat exaggerated, claiming he continued to fight until his last breath against the Bolsheviks. The new president, Karl Dönitz, delivered a lengthy eulogy about Hitler's heroic end without addressing the actual facts, urging the German people to confront the genocide perpetrated against them by the superior Bolshevik enemies. This decision to postpone the inevitable surrender extended the fighting period until May 8th. The news of Hitler's death spread worldwide officially, with the BBC broadcasting Dönitz's speech, along with a warning that it could be just a propaganda ruse to facilitate Hitler's escape. The Daily Express ran the headline, "Hitler is dead," on its front page, but categorically refused to mourn him, stating it would report every detail regarding the manner of his death, but would not touch upon his notorious criminal career. Despite the confusion, people accepted the idea of Hitler's death. U.S. President Harry Truman addressed the news of Hitler's death in a less than official manner during a press conference the day after the announcement, when a reporter asked him about his knowledge of the news, to which he simply replied yes. While Truman admitted they were unaware of the details of Hitler's death, he insisted they knew from reliable sources that Hitler was dead. However, Truman did not disclose the identity of those reliable sources, though we know for sure that the source was not Stalin. Despite knowing the truth and believing it, Stalin did not announce it and preferred to spread various rumors about Hitler's escape to Argentina, Spain, or elsewhere. Some believe he adopted this strategy because maintaining global tension served his political schemes. Whatever the reason, Stalin vehemently denied the news of Hitler's death when he personally met Truman at the Potsdam Conference in July 1945. However, we cannot rule out the possibility that this action was meant to mock the American president, as if to say in a veiled way, "I know something you don't." Despite Hitler's desire to fight until the last breath, Himmler confessed to an acquaintance in the Swedish government, Count Folke Bernadotte, about Germany's slim hope of victory in the war. Himmler wanted to avoid further casualties in the hope that Bernadotte would assist him in facilitating successful negotiations with the West. Thousands of prisoners in concentration camps were rescued, but this made little difference to Himmler. The Allies were adamant about Germany's unconditional surrender. In the last week of Hitler's life, a Western radio announcement regarding Himmler's secret negotiations incited Hitler's rage against Himmler, stripping him of all his government positions, expelling him from the party, and ordering his arrest. After that, Himmler executed his final desperate plan to join the unknown German soldiers fleeing westward, shaving his mustache, placing a patch over his eye, and disposing of his glasses before heading to the British-controlled area in northern Germany. However, his disguise failed to conceal his identity, and he was arrested at a checkpoint. Himmler preferred death over capture and swallowed a cyanide capsule. When Hermann Göring learned about Hitler's acceptance of the inevitability of defeat, he sent him a telegram inquiring if that meant he should assume the presidency of the government under the 1941 decree. Hitler, already furious over Himmler's betrayal, ordered Göring stripped of all his positions, or he would face arrest and execution. Although Göring complied with the orders, Hitler remained determined to arrest him regardless. He was detained briefly, but after urgent communications with the Allies, he offered to surrender and was tried in Nuremberg, where he was convicted of war crimes, but managed to take his own life just minutes before his scheduled execution. Many units in Berlin continued to fight after Hitler's death, mostly consisting of teenagers, while some older men joined the militia to prevent the Russians from capturing their capital. Leaving those units was punishable by death. Even as the Russians besieged the city, the German forces of the 12th Army, led by Walter Wenck, were ordered to cease fighting the Americans on the Western Front and return to Berlin by fighting through enemy lines. This strategy aimed to allow as many soldiers and civilians as possible to reach the western border controlled by America and Britain, as no one wanted to be in an area dominated by the Russians. Although Wenck failed to break through the Russian lines, it is said that his actions allowed thousands of German civilians to escape towards the western border. After Hitler's death, the apolitical Admiral Karl Dönitz was briefly appointed as the new leader of Germany. When Stalin learned of Hitler's death, a man known for his brutality and extreme frankness, it is claimed that he called Hitler a fool